You're listening to Dark Rain Chronicles. The rain hides many things, but it also remembers. Secrets washed away, voices swallowed by the storm. These are the stories it brings back, and tonight, you will hear them. Before me, the alley yawned, a jagged fissure of shadow splitting the city's neon-painted night. A shortcut prudence screamed against, yet the diner shift beckoned, my tardiness already a palpable weight. Just this solitary instance, I bargained with myself. What harm resided in saved minutes? As the gloom embraced me, a chilling premonition surfaced. I was poised to discover the precise cost. For half a year, the graveyard shift at Sal's Haven had been my reality, a necessary compromise fueling tuition payments while I navigated the final stretch of my degree. Ordinarily, the 20-minute trek from my cramped apartment afforded ample time, a buffer against unforeseen delays. Tonight, however, ensnared by the dense pages of an impending exam, time had slipped its leash, leaving me scrambling. Even deep into the night, the primary avenues pulsed with life. A cacophony of car horns, fractured melodies spilling from taverns, figures drifting along sidewalks bathed in the warm exhale of summer. Another evening, perhaps, I might have savored this urban vibrancy. But now, only the specter of Sal's displeasure if I clocked in late again occupied my thoughts. Then, my gaze snagged upon it. The alley, a slender passage cleaving two hulking buildings, promising a 5-minute reprieve. Always, I had skirted its entrance, my mother's cautionary tales of shadowed lanes and predatory strangers echoing in my mind. Tonight, though, desperation usurped caution. A deep inhalation, a plunge into the waiting dark. Instantly, the street's clamor dissolved, supplanted by an unnerving stillness punctuated only by the rhythmic drip of unseen water, the furtive skittering of hidden things. The air hung heavy, thick with the miasma of refuse and an unidentifiable, cloying undertone. My pace accelerated, footfalls ricocheting between the confining brick walls. Escape velocity was the goal. Midway through, I registered it. Another cadence of steps, heavier, distinctly masculine, sounding from behind. A jolt, sharp and cold, shot through me. Yet I commanded calm. Someone else navigating the same passage, surely. Nothing more. But then a second set joined the first, and then a third. A swift, fearful glance over my shoulder confirmed the dread icing my veins. 3 figures trailed me, faces obscured by the deep shadows, yet their predatory gait broadcasted their intent with terrifying clarity. Faster now, my hands balling into useless fists at my sides. The alley's exit, a distant glimmering promise, seemed an eternity away. Behind me, their pace quickened too, subtlety abandoned. "Hey, doll," one voice scraped, coarse and laced with mockery. "Where you rushing off to?" Silence was my only reply. I pushed onward, gaze locked on the beckoning glow ahead. Ignore them. Perhaps they would tire, peel away. Then, a hand clamped onto my arm, arresting my momentum, yanking me backward. I whirled, confronting my pursuers directly. Close now, their features sharpened. 3 men, all significantly larger than me. Eyes hard, mouths twisted into cruel approximations of smiles. Your mama never tell you it's rude not to answer, sneered the one whose grip held me captive. His breath assaulted me, a foul blend of stale liquor and smoke. My attempt to wrench free was met with tightened pressure. Please, I managed, hating the tremor, the smallness in my voice. I'm late for work. I don't want any trouble. Laughter erupted, bouncing harshly off the enclosed space. Hear that, fellas, the apparent leader drawled. She doesn't want trouble. Well, isn't that a crying shame? Fear, paralyzing and absolute, flooded my system, short-circuiting thought. Scream, run, fight, do something. Yet I remained frozen, a cornered animal transfixed by the inevitable. The man holding me pinned me against the cold brick, his face mere inches from mine. All right, let's make this easy. Hand over that cute little purse, and maybe we just let you walk. My grip tightened instinctively on my bag. Inside lay not just my wallet, but my textbooks, my meticulously compiled notes, the very arsenal I needed for tomorrow's exam. No, I heard myself say, the firmness a startling counterpoint to the terror. His eyes narrowed into slits. No, don't think you grasp the situation, dollface. We ain't asking. He lunged for the bag. In that instant, something fractured within me. Perhaps it was the sheer indignity, the raw fear boiling over into fury, but the passive victim vanished. My knee drove upward, connecting sharply with his groin. A choked grunt escaped him as he folded. Seizing the moment, I shoved past his crumpled form and bolted. Shouts erupted behind me, the heavy thud of pursuing feet pounding the asphalt. Fear became fuel, adrenaline a potent propellant launching me forward at a speed I hadn't known I possessed. The alley's mouth widened, the streetlights blazing like sanctuary beacons. Almost there. A hand snagged the back of my shirt, jerking me off balance. I stumbled, windmilling my arms to stay upright, then spun to face my captor. His eyes blazed with fury, a hand already raised to strike. Pure instinct took over. I swung my heavy bag in a wide, desperate arc. The dense weight of textbooks met the side of his head with a sickeningly solid impact. He staggered, momentarily stunned. Again, I ran. My lungs burned, my heart hammered against my ribs with a force that felt destructive. People now visible on the main street, moving through their own realities, oblivious. Help! The word tore from my throat as I burst onto the relative safety of the sidewalk. Somebody, please help me. Heads pivoted. Movement ceased. Behind me, the distinct sound of retreating footsteps faded as my assailants dissolved back into the alley's concealing darkness. A concerned couple hurried towards me. The woman's arm offered immediate, trembling comfort around my shoulders, while the man, phone already pressed to his ear, peered warily down the shadowed passage, relaying details to the police. It was finished. I was safe. The subsequent hour unfolded in a surreal haze of flashing lights, official questions, and sympathetic murmurs. By the time I finally reached Sal's Haven, the clock declared me egregiously late. But Sal, taking in my tear-streaked face and the uniformed officer standing beside me, let his customary gruffness dissolve. "Saints alive, kid," he murmured, guiding me toward an empty booth. "Forget the shift. Sit. Coffee's on me." Clutching the warm mug, my hands still betraying a faint tremor, I replayed the night's terrifying trajectory. How easily it could have ended differently. A fraction slower, a degree weaker, a surrender to fear. But I hadn't surrendered. When everything contracted to that single, critical point, an unknown reserve of strength had surfaced. I had fought. I had endured. The police never apprehended the men from the alley. Yet, in the days and weeks that followed, I actively refused to cede territory to fear. Self-defense classes became a priority, pepper spray a constant companion, and yes, dark alleys remained firmly off limits. Crucially, though, I continued my walks to work, persisted with my studies, refused to shrink my world. That night had forged a vital understanding. The world holds dangers, shadows pool in unexpected places, but resilience resides within us, often untapped. Sometimes the most profound act is the refusal to be prey. Occasionally, the memory surfaces, walking home late, passing a darkened passage, the phantom echo of fear, the remembered desperation, the electric surge of adrenaline. Mostly, though, what resonates is the instant I chose defiance, the startling discovery of my own capacity. It's a truth I carry still, an internal compass reminding me that even in profound darkness, we possess the means to ignite our own light. No matter how menacing the shadows loom, they need not extinguish us. And now, years removed, when my path takes me past that same alleyway, en route to my office, the era of late-night diner shifts long concluded. Fear finds no purchase. Instead, a quiet pride settles. Pride for the frightened young woman who refused to be broken. Pride in the distance traveled since that harrowing night. Because ultimately, life isn't about circumventing all the dark alleys. It's about possessing the unshakable knowledge that should we find ourselves within one, we hold the power to fight our way back into the light. And that knowledge, that intrinsic strength, is a luminescence no shadow can truly quench. Each footfall on the leaf-strewn path sent sharp cracks echoing through the woodland hush. I halted, my exhalations misting the crisp autumnal air. A profound stillness had settled over the trees, an unnatural quietude that prickled the skin, as if the forest itself held its breath. Then a flicker, movement glimpsed between the rust-colored trunks. My solitude was fractured. This pilgrimage into serenity was rapidly devolving into something primal, a struggle for survival. My name is Silas. Wild places have always been my refuge. Raised near the sprawling northern ranges, my youth was measured in miles, explored through timberland and across stony peaks. Now, nearing 30, the city's clamor still drives me back to these sanctuaries whenever possible. This time, a solo weekend expedition, seeking communion with nothing but my pack and the vast, untamed terrain. Hours I'd trekked, immersed in the quietude, surrounded by the blazing palette of fall. Yet, As afternoon shadows lengthened, the tranquility began to fray, replaced by a creeping disquiet. It manifested subtly at first, an aberrant snap of wood off-trail, a skittering in the undergrowth that didn't quite sound like squirrel or chipmunk. Familiar forest noises suddenly seemed discordant, setting my nerves alight. Dismissing it as mere wildlife felt increasingly like self-deception. A deeper instinct whispered caution. Rounding a curve in the pathway, the sight that met my eyes sent a chill coursing through me. Nestled in a small clearing, a grotesque parody of a campsite materialized. Tarpaulins, grimy and torn, were strung between trees in a haphazard labyrinth. Refuse, empty tins, discarded bottles, formed small, glinting mounds on the forest floor, and gouged deep into the bark of a venerable oak. 2 words screamed in jagged, furious strokes. Keep out. My heart hammered against my ribs. Retreat, swift and silent, was the only imperative. I pivoted, intending to retrace my steps, but the sound of voices, coarse, masculine tones, froze me mid-motion. They were close, rapidly closing in. Panic surged, electric. I dove behind a substantial granite boulder, scrunching down, willing myself invisible. Through a fissure in the rock, I watched 3 figures shamble into view. Men etched with hardship and neglect, their beards untamed, garments stained and torn. Each carried a long gun, slung with casual menace over his shoulder. Told you I heard something. One rasped, flinty eyes sweeping the perimeter. Probably just another city hiker. Think these woods are theirs for the strolling. Well, the second man offered a low, chilling chuckle. If you did hear one, he picked a poor damn day for a nature walk. I ceased breathing, terrified the slightest exhalation might betray me. They prowled the clearing, their search pattern bringing them inexorably nearer my refuge. Immobility wasn't a sustainable strategy. Discovery felt imminent. Seizing a fleeting moment when their backs were momentarily turned, a desperate surge propelled me from behind the stone. I bolted, plunging headlong into the dense underbrush, branches lashing my face like thorny whips. Behind me, shouts erupted, sharp cries of alarm, followed by the sickeningly distinct clack, clack of rifles being readied. There! Over there! Get him! Fear lent an impossible speed to my limbs. I vaulted fallen timber, ducked beneath grasping boughs, the once peaceful forest transformed into a treacherous gauntlet. A rifle's report slammed against my eardrums, the projectile splintering wood scant inches from my skull. Bark fragments stung my cheek like angry hornets. No slowing, no looking back. Only flight. I could hear their heavy pursuit, crashing through the woods behind me. They possessed an intimacy with this terrain I lacked. Capture felt like a matter of time. A plan, any plan, was desperately needed. Ahead, the ground dropped away into a narrow ravine. Without conscious thought, I launched myself down the steep incline, skidding amidst a cascade of loose rock and soil. At the bottom, a fissure beneath an overhang offered meager sanctuary. I wedged myself into the cramped recess, pressing back into the damp earth, striving for absolute stillness. Moments later, the thudding boots of my pursuers reached the ravine's lip. Where'd he vanish? One snarled, frustration raw in his voice. Can't be far. Down there, somewhere. No way he outran us that quick, another insisted. My breath hitched as I heard them scrambling down the slope. Pebbles and dirt showered the entrance to my hiding place. I clenched every muscle, praying they wouldn't peer too closely into the shadows. For an eternity, compressed into minutes, they scoured the ravine floor, their footsteps echoing unnervingly close. I heard them kicking at bushes, probing crevices. My body remained coiled, braced for discovery, for the final confrontation. Then, blessedly, one called out, he ain't here. Must have pushed on downstream. Come on. Their retreating sounds gradually faded into the forest's ambience, but I remained entombed in the cold earth. Only when the light filtering through the canopy began to wane, and my muscles screamed from the sustained tension, did I dare to emerge. My legs trembled violently as I clawed my way back up the embankment. Every rustle, every twig snap sent jolts of adrenaline through me, convinced of their imminent return. Yet the woods held only the familiar evening symphony of birdsong and insect drone. Reaching the trail in darkness, with those men potentially watching, felt suicidally risky. My sole recourse was to navigate onward through the night, putting maximum distance between their squalid camp and myself. As full darkness descended, the forest morphed into an alien landscape. Shadows writhed, conjuring menacing shapes from stump and stone. An owl's sudden hoot nearly stopped my heart. Still, I pressed on. Under the indifferent gaze of constellations, I walked, guided by starlight and sheer will. When the first faint fingers of dawn finally pierced the dense foliage, I was utterly spent, parched, ravenous, and profoundly lost, but breathing. Alive. The sun climbed higher, granting permission to cease movement. Slumping against the broad trunk of a maple, I surveyed my condition. Water dangerously low, provisions non-existent, location unknown. Yet, distance lay between me and the armed men, a vital buffer. Just as I began to contemplate the bleakness of my situation, a distant, rhythmic chopping sliced through the morning air. Helicopter blades. Search and rescue. My failure to return must have triggered an alert. Scrambling towards the nearest opening in the canopy, I waved my arms with frantic energy as the aircraft materialized overhead. When it banked, clearly having spotted me, and began its descent, a wave of relief washed over me so potent it threatened to buckle my knees. The debriefing with park officials and local constabulary felt surreal, dreamlike. I recounted the makeshift camp, the armed men, the terrifying pursuit through the wilderness. They listened, their expressions grim, confirming suspicions about a group of illegal occupants who had been menacing visitors for months. "You're fortunate," remarked one ranger, his voice somber. "Others, encountering that crew, haven't walked away." Driven back towards my vehicle, the preceding 24 hours replayed in stark contrast. The initial idyll shattered by raw terror, a desperate flight culminating in improbable escape. The wilderness, once a balm, now bore teeth. It had always been my sanctuary, a realm of quiet adventure. Now it held a new, unsettling dimension, capricious, potentially lethal. Yet paradoxically, this brush with mortality didn't sour my affinity for the wild. Instead, it forged a deeper respect for its untamed heart, its potent indifference. Pulling away from the trailhead, steering towards home, I knew I would return. Perhaps not to this exact path, shadowed by recent horror, but inevitably back to the embrace of the woods. That harrowing ordeal, terrifying as it was, had unearthed something within me. A resilience, a resourcefulness, a courage previously untested. The next time I laced my boots, I would carry a heightened awareness, a sharper vigilance. But I would also move with a more profound sense of being alive, attuned to the fierce, elemental pulse of nature. Sometimes, illumination is found only in the deepest shadows. As for the men in the forest, the authorities promised investigation. Yet, a part of me understood that the wilderness guards its secrets fiercely, and some truths remain forever concealed beneath its leafy canopy. My gratitude for the narrow escape was immense. The lessons learned etched indelibly, companions for all adventures yet to come. A jolt near 2 in the morning, head thick and throbbing from air recycled within these concrete lungs, heavy with the drone of ancient wiring. Solitude is my neighbor in this carcass of concrete and neglect. The walls fissure like drought-cracked earth. The floors tilt underfoot with geological slowness. Paint peels from door frames in sun-bleached scabs. The corridors offer no solace, only the tangled ganglia of wires, weeping pipes, and the stark glare of budget luminaires. This quiet dereliction was a choice. Human interaction grates. I preferred a muted existence afforded by near vacancy. Few souls haunt these halls, and those who do pass in silence. Perfect. My own cell sits on the 3rd floor, windows squinting into a chasm of an alley, choked with skeletal furniture and the oxidized husks of bins. Their miasma slithers upward when the sash is lifted. Consequently, it remains sealed, preserving the interior's stagnant peace. Tonight, though, the apartment's atmosphere presses close, stale and suffocating. Restlessness stirs. The circulatory system of the building groans, hot water pipes delivering their percussive knocks, the kitchen's fluorescent strip emitting a low, insistent buzz. Air. I need untainted air. Clad in worn sweatpants and a meager jacket, I ease into shoes, the simple act echoing in the stillness. The apartment door complains with a high-pitched whine as it opens onto the corridor's gloom. One bulb near the stairwell spasms, casting epileptic shadows. The air hangs thick with the scent of damp decay, of spores feasting in the dark. Somewhere, faint and distorted, a television murmurs through plaster. My own tread reverberates, unnaturally loud, as I ascend the raw concrete steps. At the summit, a heavy metal door resists, then yields onto the terrace. Emptiness reigns. Below, the city sprawls, a distant, blurred incandescence. Scattered rooftops etch themselves against a sky veiled in cloud, swallowing the stars. A low parapet rims the expanse of tarred gravel. Discarded metal chairs slump in a rusty embrace off to one side, attended by a constellation of empty beer bottles. I draw a breath, then release it. The air bites, cooler than within, carrying a damp weight. Drawn to the precipice, I lean out, scanning the familiar canyon of the alley. Nothing untoward, only shadows clinging to damp pavement. A momentary quiet settles over the depths. Turning to retreat, my gaze catches and freezes. Something is perched upon the parapet, hunched, roughly human scale, perhaps a fraction smaller. Its flesh possesses the pallor of old ash, stretched taut and papery over unseen angles. It rests forward on its hands, hands that defy normalcy, fingers elongated, warped, knuckles protruding like aberrant growths. It stares directly at me. Its eyes are abyssal slits, devoid of color, just vacant apertures punched into the skull. A cold clench seizes my shoulders. My gut twists into a knot. Air hitches in my throat. The thing's chest cavity rises and falls with glacial slowness. No sound escapes it. No utterance breaks the profound silence. Instinctively, I recoil a step. My back collides with the cold, rusted metal of a ventilation shaft. The smell of oxidation fills my nostrils. What action is there to take? The creature remains utterly still, an obsidian gaze locked on mine. My thoughts dart to the door, the sanctuary below. A flicker of attention towards escape. And when my eyes snap back to the parapet, gone. It executed no discernible movement. One moment present, the next, absence. The parapet stands bare. The forlorn chairs and their glassy companions remain undisturbed. Hesitantly, I edge forward, peering over the brink again, searching for any trace. Below lies only the alley's familiar obscurity, the sheen of wet concrete. A scan of the rooftop confirms my solitude. Vanished, as if it had been a mere projection onto the night. My heart hammers against my ribs. A clammy sweat breaks across my skin. A profound sense of foolishness washes over me, standing alone under the occluded sky. Yet the vision remains seared, undeniable. The ghost of its scrutiny lingers, a palpable weight. The roof is no longer tenable. I pivot, hurrying back towards the heavy door, descending into the stairwell. The air on the upper landing feels unnaturally chilled now, the lights perceptibly dimmer. My feet find the steps rapidly, carrying me down to my own floor, my own door. Inside, the lock clicks home with finality. Windows are checked, confirmed sealed. Every light switch is flipped, bathing the small space in the humming, buzzing glow of cheap fixtures. I stand, catching my breath, straining to hear anything beyond the building's usual complaints. At first, only the familiar quiet answers. A detour to the bathroom. Water spatters into the basin, running ochre before clearing. The face staring back from the mirror is haggard, eyes webbed with red. A faint tremor dances in my hands. The image persists. That ashen form, those void-like eyes. Humanoid, yet utterly alien. Returning to the living area, I contemplate distraction. A book, the television. But focus evaporates. My mind relentlessly replays the rooftop encounter. Then, a new sound intrudes. Faint, insidious, within the walls. Metal grating on metal, like a pipe, loose in its moorings, shifting restlessly. I drift towards the corner, tracking the noise. It migrates, now seeming to emanate from the ceiling directly above. A slow, deliberate crawl along the path of the pipes. Then silence. I stand rigid, listening. A minute stretches, pregnant with nothing. Just the old building settling, I tell myself. Just the groans of its tired frame. But the lights choose that moment to stutter. The kitchen fluorescent dims, buzzes violently, then recovers. The lamp beside me follows suit. A crick forms in my neck as I survey the room. Does it feel Smaller? Claustrophobic. Everything occupies its usual station. The threadbare couch, the scarred coffee table, the television perched on its flimsy stand, the barren shelves. Yet a sensation of compression lingers, as if the very walls are inching inward. Forcing myself onto the couch, I regulate my breathing. An hour dissolves. The television plays on, volume muted, some forgotten late-night program flickering unheeded. Another spasm from the lights. Then a sharp pop resonates from the hallway just outside my door. Quick, metallic, like stressed tin yielding. I rise, drawn to the threshold, pressing my ear against the wood. A whisper, the barest exhalation, indistinct, uncertain. Unlatching the lock, I crack the door open. The corridor stretches into dimness. The far light flickers, a dying pulse. Nothing else. Slowly, carefully, I close the door. Turning back into the room, a prickling awareness crawls up my neck. The distinct, unnerving certainty of not being alone. The silence has gained density, pressing inward. From the kitchen drawer, my hand retrieves a heavy screwdriver, its weight a small, solid comfort. What defense it offers is unclear, but passivity feels unbearable. I approach the window. Grime obscures the glass, but the alley's void and a slice of the adjacent brick wall are visible. My own reflection stares back, normal, merely exhausted. Then, behind my reflected form, low to the ground, a flicker of movement. Swift, furtive. I spin, screwdriver raised defensively. Nothing. Just the familiar shapes of the couch, the empty shelves. My pulse accelerates anew. A frantic search ensues. Behind the sofa, beneath the table, even wrenching open the shallow coat closet. Empty. My mouth is parched. In the kitchen, I fill a glass from the tap, but the water tastes foul, metallic. I spit it into the sink. The pipe beneath rattles in protest. Crouching, I peer into the cabinet. Old plumbing, corroded joints. A single droplet swells on a fitting, detaches, and strikes the cabinet floor with a dull, final tap. Sleep seems impossible, but I extinguish all lights save the single lamp by the couch. Wrapping myself in a thin blanket, I wedge into the corner of the sofa, facing the door, the screwdriver clutched tight. Every creak, every settling groan of the building keeps me taut. Closing my eyes brings only the gray revenant, staring from its parapet perch. Eyes open, fixed on the door. Minutes ooze by. The tapping resumes within the walls, faint but persistent. I try to tune it out. At some point, exhaustion must claim me, because I surface with a violent start. The lamp flickers erratically. My watch indicates nearly 4 in the morning. The tapping is louder now, more defined. Not just tapping, but movement, a skittering progress through the building's metal veins. Rising, I move into my small entryway. The door remains securely locked. Beyond it, the hallway appears unchanged, though steeped in shadow. Screwdriver still in hand, I step out. The air bites. The floor beneath feels warped, uneven. Slowly, deliberately, I advance down the corridor, listening. A metallic scraping emanates from the far end, near the stairwell's descent. Step by cautious step, I approach. As I draw near, the sound abruptly ceases. I halt at the top of the stairs, peering down into the darkness of the lower floors. The building's chronic neglect of lighting seems amplified tonight. The smell of damp concrete and settled dust fills my nostrils. My hand finds the railing. Its surface is rough, frigid. A noise directly overhead draws my gaze upward. A light fixture several floors above, flickers wildly, buzzes, then falls still. Retreat. The urge is strong. Wandering these shadowed arteries feels profoundly unwise. Turning back towards my apartment, a strange distortion greets me. The hallway seems to have elongated. My door, visible in the distance, feels impossibly remote. Panic quickens my pace. My footsteps echo, amplified. Reaching the door at last, breath coming short, I fumble with the lock and stumble inside. Back within my four walls, dizziness washes over me. I sink onto the couch, head cradled in my hands, listening to the ragged rhythm of my own breathing. The sense of presence, the unseen watcher, hasn't dissipated. Turning the television back on, low volume, seeking the banal comfort of noise. The screen erupts in static, then resolves into some ancient rerun. Canned laughter rings hollow, mocking. Calm down. Think. Leaving? Fleeing into the pre-dawn streets. The thought repels. I have nowhere to go, and the prospect of navigating the outside world now, in this state, unthinkable. Perhaps the lobby, a change of scenery, closer to the exit, might offer some psychological buffer. Keys in hand, I venture out again. Descending the stairs, the pipes overhead seem alive, rattling softly, punctuated by irregular taps, as if something drums upon them from within. I suppress the images that rise unbidden. The lobby is a small, bleak space, illuminated by a single, faltering bulb above the glass front door. Through it, the street lies deserted, save for parked cars and a stray cat investigating a dumpster. Mundane normalcy. Standing by the glass, the impulse to flee surfaces again, only to be quashed by the reality of my attire. Sweatpants, thin jacket, no wallet, no phone. Just keys and the screwdriver, heavy in my pocket. I hesitate, stranded between the building's creeping dread and the exposure of the street. Turning from the door, my gaze falls upon the corridor leading back to the stairs. For a disorienting instant, it appears to curve, to warp subtly away from true. I blink hard. Normalcy reasserts itself. A trick of the light, the decaying structure playing on exhausted eyes. Back to the apartment. Wait for daylight. Surely daylight will dispel these phantoms. The ascent seems longer. The scraping within the pipes intensifies, accompanied now by a faint odor, like burnt dust. The cracked paint on the walls seems more pronounced, marred by small, dark stains I don't recall seeing before. Floor by floor, I climb. Reaching the third level, the hallway lights flicker in greeting. I reach my door, still shut. Unlocking it, I slip inside, immediately engaging the deadbolt and chain. Another sweep. Bathroom, closet, under the bed frame, behind the couch. Still empty. I risk cracking the window, just an inch. A thin breeze enters, carrying the alley's signature rot. I slam it shut again. I slide down the wall opposite the door, settling onto the floor, screwdriver gripped tightly. Every muscle remains coiled, anticipating something. Listening intently to the building's internal dialogue. Pipes creak, then subside. The lights maintain their low hum. Far off, a siren wails briefly, then silence returns. Sweat beads on my forehead. I rub my eyes. They burn. Another hour crawls past. Closer to 5 now. Soon, the sky must begin to pale. Rising stiffly, I check the window. Only darkness and the distant sodium glow remain. Dawn holds back. I move to the door, listening. The hallway beyond seems quiet. Unlocking it, easing it open a fraction. It looks normal. Tentatively, I step out into the corridor. A tightness constricts my chest. The light overhead flickers. My gaze drifts to the end of the hall. A shape coalesces in the dimness, amorphous, indistinct, like a deeper patch of shadow. I squint, trying to resolve it, and it dissolves. Gone. Heart pounding violently, I retreat into the apartment, securing the door once more. Leaning against it, I focus on breathing slowly, deliberately, through my nose. My head aches with a dull, persistent throb. Back on the couch. I switch off the television. Silence feels preferable now to manufactured noise. I listen to the sound of my own breath, the blood pulsing in my ears. My knuckles are white where they clench the screwdriver. My shoulders ache with sustained tension. Mouth dry again. I risk another drink from the tap. The water is stale, flat, but the metallic tang is gone. I swallow it slowly. Time stretches, attenuates. Around 6, the first tentative suggestion of daylight filters through the grime-coated window. A gray, uncertain light. Coinciding with it, the building seems to settle. The internal noises subside to their usual distant taps and murmurs. The lights burn steadily. Checking the hallway again through the peephole reveals only its familiar, shabby length. Nothing appears altered. I sit by the window, watching the alley gradually gain definition. The shapes of trash cans and broken furniture emerging from the gloom. The sky remains overcast, a uniform, uninspiring gray. Safety feels distant, but the acute sense of being trapped begins to recede. What transpired last night? The question hangs, unanswered. The rooftop encounter was real. The building's subsequent strangeness, undeniable. But now, bathed in the weak morning light, an exhausted quiet prevails. I stand, stretching limbs cramped from vigilance. The unease remains, a low hum beneath the surface, the fear that it could reappear at any moment. But I push it down. Perhaps it won't return. Perhaps the day can be navigated. I prepare instant coffee, the ritual familiar, the taste bitter but warm. Another patrol of the apartment, room by room. In the impartial light of morning, everything looks depressingly ordinary. A compulsion draws me back to the roof, unwanted, yet necessary, to see it in the daylight. The stairwell smells merely of old dust now. The heavy terrace door groans open onto the expanse, empty. The chairs, the bottles, undisturbed. The parapet stands solid, unremarkable. I approach the edge, look down. The city stirs below. The faint sounds of traffic, a distant door slamming, drift up. No sign of the ashen figure. I stand for a minute, arms crossed against the cool morning air washing over my face. Then I turn and descend. My hand on the railing feels steady this time. Back on my floor, the hallway is just a hallway, peeling paint and uneven floor included. I unlock my door, step inside. The apartment's air is thick with the ghosts of stale coffee and confinement. Throwing the window wide, I let the morning in. It carries no freshness, only the city's ambient breath, yet it feels less heavy, less watchful than the night air. I don't understand what it was. The creature on the roof, the building's apparent sentience, its collaboration in my fear. I know only the bone-deep weariness, the frayed edges of my nerves. I sink onto the couch, not to sleep, but to rest, to endure the day, to remain here, quiet, hoping its visit was singular. I try to banish the memory of those empty eyes, the sound of scraping within the walls. Instead, I listen to the city waking outside my open window, keep my gaze fixed on the doorway, waiting. just in case. Midnight bled through the window panes, finding Elias awake, adrift in the unfamiliar silence of the old house. Sleep remained a distant shore, repelled by the furtive creaks and whispers that echoed from the structure's bones. The proprietor, Mr. Abernathy, had dismissed the attic as a void, harboring only forgotten boxes and detritus. Yet, a primal urge, a need to confront the unknown source of his unease, propelled Elias towards it. The narrow stairs leading upwards whined under his weight, each step a complaint. The door handle met his palm like a shard of ice embedded in rough metal. Inside, the single, feeble bulb offered little more than a suggestion of light, forcing him to carve a path with his flashlight's beam. The air hung thick and stagnant, heavy with the ghosts of years, the scent of dust and decay stinging his nostrils. Relics of previous lives huddled in the gloom. Cardboard sarcophagi slumped against the far wall. Spectral chairs draped in shadow. A fractured dresser. Yellowed newspapers crumbling into history. And there, holding court in the center, oriented towards the single grimy window, stood an old rocking chair, hewn from dark wood, its back arched elegantly, its armrests worn smooth by generations of contact. It possessed a solid, brooding presence. Elias drifted closer, his light tracing its form. A fine shroud of dust veiled the seat. Scars of time marred its legs and armrests, small chronicles of bumps and scrapes. He swiped the back of his hand across his damp forehead. The air was oppressively hot and still, clinging like a shroud. The flashlight beams swept the floorboards beneath the chair, illuminating only more dust and the intricate, abandoned lace of spiderwebs. Standing there, bathed in the weak light, the anxiety that had gripped him downstairs felt suddenly absurd. The space seemed utterly mundane. He moved cautiously, nudging a nearby box with his foot, listening for the scurry of rodents or any clue to the nocturnal disturbances. A hollow thud, then silence. Retreat beckoned. With a final glance towards the rocking chair, he turned to leave. For an instant, a trick of the weary eye, perhaps, he thought he saw it shift. A minute tremor, maybe the ancient floorboards settling. He froze, breath held captive, gaze locked onto the chair. It remained utterly still. Shaking his head at his own frayed nerves, Elias exited the attic, pulling the heavy door shut, the click of the lock echoing briefly before he descended back into the house's uneasy quiet. Sleep remained elusive. 2 hours past midnight, the silence fractured. A whisper of sound, tentative at first, then gaining confidence. Wood on wood, a rhythmic friction. It emanated from above. Heart suddenly frantic against his ribs, Elias grabbed the flashlight and flew up the protesting stairs, quicker this time, driven by a desperate need for explanation. A loose window, a draft, anything rational. At the summit, he pressed his ear against the attic door. The creaking was undeniable now, a steady, insistent metronome of dread. He fumbled with the lock, threw open the door. Under the weak ceiling bulb, it swayed, back and forth, slow and deliberate. The rest of the attic was utterly still. Sweat bloomed on his brow, his hands trembled. He thrust the flashlight forward, pinning the chair in its beam. The motion faltered, bled away, until it ceased. The air thickened, pressing down, a palpable weight settling on his chest. His own footfalls seemed unnaturally loud as Elias approached the sentinel-like chair. He circled it, flashlight probing, searching for the trickery. Hidden strings, wires, some mechanism to explain the impossible. There was nothing. He knelt, lowering himself slowly, and extended a hand to push the chair gently. It yielded easily, rocking on its curved runners, emitting the very same groan, the familiar squeak that had drawn him back. He waited, poised in silence. Nothing. A wave of foolishness washed over him. It was just a chair, inanimate wood and time. He clicked off the flashlight, testing the gloom. The lone bulb cast skeletal shadows, but revealed no open windows, no source for a draft. The air remained heavy and motionless. With a sigh that ruffled the dust, he switched the light back on, cast one final perplexed look at the silent chair, and retreated once more, locking the door firmly behind him. Another hour dissolved into the deep night before the rhythm returned, insistent, undeniable. A curse hissed through Elias's clenched teeth. This time, darkness was his cloak. He ascended without the flashlight, guided by the sound alone. It was clearer now, sharper, a steady back-and-forth cadence filling the stairwell. He slipped inside the attic, a wraith moving through shadows. Under the lone bulb's watery gaze, the chair performed its solitary waltz, slow, hypnotic, unwavering. Elias's throat constricted. His hand found the doorframe, clamping down for support. Rational explanations evaporated like mist. Wind. Vibrations from the distant street. Nothing fit. The house itself felt profoundly silent, holding its breath. He took a tentative step forward. The rocking ceased instantly. He took a step back. It resumed its gentle sway. Forward, stop, back, start. A chilling dance of proximity. A thought, cold and sharp, pierced his mind. It can sense me. He didn't dare voice it, but the question formed silently. Can you hear my thoughts? The response was immediate and violent. The rocking surged, the woods screaming in protest as the arcs grew wider, faster. His heart hammered. Another thought, desperate. Stillness. Stop. As quickly as it began, the motion obeyed, slowing, then ceasing altogether. Ice traced the path down his spine, his fingertips growing numb. He recoiled towards the door. Move again. It obliged, tilting forward and back, the rough sound scraping the silence. The room seemed to tilt around him, a wave of dizziness washing over him. A bolder query surfaced from the depths of his fear. Who are you? Fury seized the chair. It rocked with uncontrollable violence, slamming back and forth, the legs thudding against the worn floorboards. Elias staggered back, sweat slicking his skin. There was no voice, no answer, only this terrifying kinetic rage. His hand, trembling uncontrollably, extended towards it, fingers outstretched. He brushed the aged wood of the backrest. A cold, deeper than winter, preternatural and shocking, shot up his arm. He snatched his hand back as if burned. The chair stopped dead. And then he heard it. A sound low and guttural, seeming to emanate from the very air around him, like choked, private laughter. It was brief, felt more in the bones than heard with the ears, and it vanished quickly. He scanned the shadows frantically. The attic held only dust and discarded things. His breath hitched, his mouth dry. Another silent plea formed. What is your purpose here? The chair began to rock again, slowly this time, but the accompanying squeak sounded rough, grating. Gooseflesh bloomed on his arms. He waited. Why this place? The tempo increased, the shriek of wood on wood intensifying. Escape screamed in his veins. He turned, desperate for the stairs. His foot met the top step. Abrupt stillness fell upon the attic. He froze, hand on the doorframe, mind blank for a moment. Then a final thought, a clear declaration. I am leaving now. Silence held. He fled down the winding stairs, the key turning in the lock with a decisive, echoing click. Night fell again, and restlessness gnawed at Elias. He paced his room before the inevitable ascent, this time armed with a small, plug-in lamp. Its stark white glare banished the deepest shadows, revealing the chair in pitiless detail. Time's etchings were starkly visible, cracks like dark veins mapping the wood, patches where the finish had surrendered, faint stains like old memories. It was ancient, yet undeniably solid. He stood a few feet away, the silence pressing in. A thought, sharp and clear as a command. Move. A single, deliberate rock answered him. Elias flinched, a fresh wave of sweat prickling his lower back. Harder. The rhythm quickened, the familiar groan filling the space. Was it truly inside his head, plucking thoughts like strings? He risked a deeper probe, a more complex question. Reveal your nature. Tell me what you are. The chair convulsed. It slammed back and forth with such force that its legs scraped violently across the floorboards, gouging the wood, raising a cloud of disturbed dust. The noise was loud, ugly, a shriek of tormented material. Elias stumbled back, colliding with a pile of boxes, coughing as dust filled his mouth and lungs. His legs threatened to buckle beneath him. He pressed a hand to his churning stomach. When the violent episode ceased, he tried simpler thoughts, whispered in his mind. You hear me? A soft, gentle rock, like a nod. Are there others? Are you alone? A slower, hesitant sway, uncertain. Do you wish me here? Do you want me to stay? A sudden, emphatic surge of motion that made his ears ring. The attic walls seemed to close in, the air crushing his lungs. He leaned over, hands on his knees, fighting for breath, staring at the dust motes swirling in the lamp's harsh glare. He straightened, looking at the chair. It was still now. Compelled by a force he didn't understand, terrified yet needing to know, he decided to touch it again. The floorboards groaned under his cautious approach. His heart pounded against his throat. When he reached it, he placed it palm flat on the backrest. The Arctic cold invaded instantly, a violation that shot up his arm. He wrenched his hand back as if burned, and the laughter returned. Closer this time, louder, sharper. A brief, visceral sound that faded quickly, but left him breathing hard and fast, wiping his mouth with trembling fingers. He searched the attic again, frantic now, tearing open boxes, finding only moth-eaten clothes, a broken vase, yellowed papers. The mundane detritus of lives concluded. He turned back. The chair sat impassive, facing the black void of the window. A defiant thought rose unbidden. You do not frighten me. The chair responded with a slow, almost playful rock. Mockery. Heat flushed Elias's face. He steeled himself for one last attempt, the deepest question he could conceive. What is your origin? How did you come to be here? And what anchors you to this space? The instant the thought fully formed, all restraint shattered. The chair hammered the floor in a manic percussion, slamming back and forth with terrifying force. The sound reverberated through the small space, through the floor, into Elias's very bones. He reeled back again, stumbling against the wall. Dust rained down. Then as suddenly as it began, abrupt silence fell. laugh, sharp, immediate, seeming to rasp right beside his ear. His scalp crawled. He raised the lamp like a ward, muscles screaming with tension. Enough. He couldn't bear more. I leave now, he thought, projecting the decision with all his will. The chair remained still. He took a step towards the door. Silence. Another step. The chair remained inert, a block of dark wood in the stark lamplight. Elias turned and fled, the lock sealing the threshold behind him like a final verdict. He spent the remainder of the night downstairs, sunk deep into the sofa, staring at the blank television screen until gray dawn crept through the windows. Silence reigned. In the following days and nights, Elias enforced a pact of avoidance. The attic remained inviolate, its door firmly locked, the key buried deep within a drawer. Sometimes faint groans or creaks drifted down from above, but he fiercely told himself it was merely the old house settling, his imagination playing tricks. He actively banished intrusive thoughts, refusing to form questions in his mind. The chair existed, he knew, a silent presence in the room above, but he refused to visit its realm. Yet, a weight lingered in his chest, the memory of ice-cold wood and that phantom, guttural chuckle, impossible to erase entirely. Occasionally, a distinct creak pierces the nocturnal quiet. Elias doesn't investigate. He closes his eyes, holds his breath, and waits rigidly for the sound to fade. He cannot know if it waits, what inscrutable hunger fuels its silent vigil. He only knows that it persists, unseen, perhaps rocking softly in the perpetual darkness, nourished by the tendrils of his lingering fear. He strives for mental quiet, maintaining a tense, silent watch, hoping the silence holds, hoping it stays where it is. Sleep remains a fugitive, banished these past 2 months since the affair at the Azure Heights Tower. My window coverings stay drawn now, dense fabric veiling the night. Certain sights burn themselves onto the retina. Certain shadows possess the unnerving habit of following one home. It commenced 3 months prior, with my tenancy in apartment 4B at the Azure Heights. The structure itself offered little grandeur, a time-scarred 6-story ascent dating from the 60s, its floors given to groans, its heating system capricious. Yet the rent was agreeable, and its proximity allowed a pedestrian commute to my data analysis position downtown. Initial weeks unfolded with unremarkable rhythm, returning from the office, microwaving sustenance, perhaps indulging in some streaming service. Occasionally, I'd occupy the diminutive balcony as dusk deepened, nursing a logger, observing the city's electric constellations ignite. That's when the silhouette first registered, poised on a balcony 3 levels above and 2 units laterally, utterly immobile, gazing intently at the street below. A mere obsidian cutout against the weathered brickwork. Initially, I ascribed it little significance. Nocturnal contemplation isn't uncommon, but several evenings fostered a disquiet. She remained static, profoundly so. No subtle weight shifts, no glance at a mobile device, no ritual of nicotine, just standing, rigid as funerary art, for protracted hours. Always the identical position, the identical posture. I began marking the time. Her manifestation occurred precisely at 11:47 p.m. Her dissolution exactly at 3:33 a.m. The location itself gnawed at me. That particular balcony seemed affixed to the 7th floor, yet the azure heights boasted only 6 stories. I rationalized it as a trick of darkness, a miscalculation of levels. After a fortnight of this nightly vigil, my observation sharpened. An alarm set for 11:45 became routine, and reliably, punctually, she would materialize. Through the magnified lenses of my binoculars, details sharpened. Attire reminiscent of a bygone era, ankle-grazing, high-collared. Her hair, long and dark, cascaded straight down her back. Never once did she present her face. A visceral crawl prickled my skin, yet fascination held me captive. Sleep eroded, those 4 hours sacrificed to staring at her unyielding form. My professional performance frayed. Bruised crescents bloomed beneath my eyes. Trivial sounds provoked exaggerated starts. Answers became a necessity. Yesterday morning, intercepting Mr. Silas, the building superintendent, in the lobby felt imperative. He wrestled with a recalcitrant handrail, muttering curses around a screwdriver clenched in his teeth. "Excuse me," a brief query, I ventured, aiming for nonchalance. "The woman in 7C, the one often on her balcony nocturnally, is she all right? It strikes me as peculiar." Silas ceased his labors, regarding me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. 7C. Son, this edifice comprises only 6 levels. A sudden aridity claimed my mouth. But I've witnessed her. Nightly. She stands there for hours, just observing the street. Silas set down his tool. "Look, perhaps your eyes are catching someone from an adjacent building. But apartment 7C is a fiction, and no woman occupies a non-existent balcony. But, furthermore," he persisted, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "the previous occupant of 6C, directly beneath your purported sighting, departed 3 years hence. We had the unit hermetically sealed, following severe water damage that compromised the entire floor. Vacant ever since." A tremor initiated in my hand. "You're certain?" "Son," he sighed, retrieving his screwdriver. "I've overseen this property for 2 decades. I possess a firm grasp of its vertical dimensions." He turned back to the handrail. "Acquire some rest. You appear depleted." Navigating the workday proved an exercise in fractured concentration. Silas's words echoed, colliding with the undeniable evidence of my own senses. Weeks of consistent observation couldn't be mere fantasy. Yet how could she inhabit architecture that wasn't there? That evening, the 11:45 alarm chimed with ominous portent. Sweat slicked my palms as I stepped onto the balcony. Below, the street lay deserted save for a lone feline scavenging refuse. The windows above remained dark voids. 11:47 p.m. She materialized. The usual stance, the familiar dress, the cascade of dark hair. But a chilling alteration arrested me. Her focus was no longer the street. It was fixed, unswervingly, upon me. An arctic current surged through my veins. My grip tightened on the metal railing, a desperate anchor. Through the binoculars, the image swam into horrifying clarity. The dress, faded and rent. The hair, not merely dark, but clumped with something viscous, black in the ambient gloom. And her face, an utter vacancy. Where features ought to reside, there existed only smooth, undifferentiated skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Yet an unnerving certainty permeated me. She saw me, had been seeing me all along. The binoculars slipped from my grasp, clattering against the concrete floor. My legs buckled. I collapsed onto the cold surface, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, threatening rupture. She remained utterly still, offering no reaction. Only that blank, smooth countenance directed my way. Scrabbling backward on hands and knees, I retreated inside, slamming the door. Fumbling with the deadbolt, the curtain yanked violently across the glass. My hands shook too violently to dial Silas's number, the late hour suddenly irrelevant yet paralyzing. The night distended into an eternity. I sat huddled in the living room, every light ablaze, flinching at each creak and groan of the old building. The heating system's ignition elicited a strangled yelp. A car horn's distant blare sent me diving behind the sofa. At precisely 3:33 a.m., an inexplicable compulsion drew my gaze toward the balcony. Through a minuscule parting in the curtains, I glimpsed the night sky, and starkly silhouetted against it, pressed intimately against my balcony door's glass, was a face. That smooth, featureless mask, staring inward. I ran. Keys, wallet, forgotten. A frantic descent down 4 flights of stairs, clad only in socks, bursting out into the indifferent street. The remainder of the night bled away in the sterile brightness of a 24-hour diner, coffee trembling in my grasp, recoiling at every passerby silhouetted against the window. At dawn, I returned, needing clothes. The balcony door remained securely locked. No disturbance marred the thin layer of dust on the exterior floor. No indication of any presence. But glancing upward to where apartment 7C should notionally exist, I perceived something that froze the marrow in my bones. The brick facade seemed warped, fluid, like reflections in distorted glass. It undulated, bulging outward here, sinking inward there. And at the epicenter of this architectural anomaly resided the unmistakable outline of a balcony, one that had no right to be. My departure was immediate. A downtown hotel room served as a temporary refuge while I sought new accommodation. I reside elsewhere now, ground floor, devoid of balconies. Yet sometimes in the deepest hours, movement flickers at the edge of my vision. The suggestion of dark hair, the whisper of a faded garment. A swift turn reveals nothing, but the certainty persists. She followed. I feel her observation, her patient waiting. Every night as 11:47 approaches, the impulse rises to look outside, to confirm her presence. I resist. I must. For I know the image that awaits, that smooth, blank visage staring back through the glass. The authorities dismissed my report as delusion. Silas maintains his unwavering insistence. No 7th floor ever existed. Conversations with other tenants yielded only blank stares. None had ever seen her. Occasionally, doubt whispers. Perhaps it was all a fabrication of a stressed mind. Then, the memory surfaced. That hideous, featureless face pressed against my balcony door, and the conviction returns with chilling force. It was real. Every terrifying moment. Her motives remain opaque, her selection of me a mystery, her persistence inexplicable. But her existence is a certainty. Out there, standing perfectly still in the enveloping darkness, waiting for my gaze to meet hers again. Hence, the curtains remain drawn. Windows are shunned after twilight, and nightly, at 11:47, the television volume increases, a futile attempt to mask any external sound. Because I know, should I yield, should I dare to part those heavy drapes, she will be there. And this time, her proximity might transcend the balcony. Medical professionals speak of paranoid ideation, triggered by stress and chronic sleep deprivation. They've supplied prescriptions for anxiolytics, recommended therapeutic intervention. Perhaps their assessment holds merit. Perhaps my psyche conjured this phantom to navigate the pressures of a new city, a demanding job, solitude. Yet I remain unconvinced, because sometimes, adrift in the profoundest part of the night, a sound infiltrates the quiet, a faint, dry scraping, akin to fingernails tracing patterns on glass. And even through the drawn curtains, even with my back resolutely turned, I feel it. That eyeless stare boring into me, patiently, eternally, waiting for me to turn around. I've begun exploring employment opportunities in distant cities. Perhaps geographical relocation might sever this spectral tether, but a deeper intuition refutes this hope. Whatever entity she represents, distance is likely meaningless. She will locate me. So I remain here, in my ground-level dwelling, curtains secured, lights burning defiantly, committing this account to paper. Perhaps another will read this and comprehend. Perhaps others share this haunting. Or perhaps this is indeed a descent into madness, a narrative I'll someday review with detached amusement at my own runaway imagination. I doubt it, though, because the clock on the wall indicates 11:46 p.m. In 1 minute, somewhere beyond my walls, she will assume her position, and though unseen, though unlooked for, I know she will be staring directly at me with that smooth, blank face, waiting, always waiting. Phantoms, apparitions, the whispers from beyond the veil. Such notions held no currency in my world, a place firmly anchored by the tangible. They were illusions for flickering screens, tales spun around dying embers. That conviction, however, fractured and ultimately dissolved during my solitary stay at the cabin. What transpired beneath those ancient trees wasn't merely a trick of weary eyes. It resonates still, an inexplicable tremor beneath the bedrock of reason. Something undeniable occurred. Something other. The place belonged to my uncle, Bernard. A relic, really, passed down yet seldom visited, nestled deep within woods that locals whispered had a brooding quality. Too remote, they'd murmur. The silence there felt watchful. Such warnings were vapor to me, an aged structure swallowed by wilderness. Perfect. A sanctuary from the clamor, a weekend reprieve. Bernard's offer of solitude was an invitation I readily accepted. Late autumn had bled the color from the landscape, leaving behind a crisp, premonitory chill. The trees stood stark and skeletal, their gnarled limbs etching dark calligraphy against the waning sky as my car navigated the threadbare track towards the cabin. It was more dilapidated than memory served, shingles curling on a sway-backed roof, window panes fractured like ice, emerald moss creeping possessively up the time-worn timber. Yet, this decay held a certain rustic gravity, the expected patina of isolation. By the time I killed the engine, twilight was painting the woods in hues of bruised orange, stretching shadows into long, distorted figures. Slinging my duffel over one shoulder, I wrestled with the antique key Bernard had provided. It turned with a reluctant, rusted groan, the door sighing open onto an atmosphere thick with damp wood and settled dust. the sepulchral scent of long, undisturbed air. The main room offered Spartan comfort, threadbare armchairs huddled near a cavernous fireplace, its hearth cold and gray. I dropped my bag, the thump echoing slightly, and set about coaxing a fire back to life, a bulwark against the insidious cold already seeping through the walls. Flames eventually caught, their nascent crackle a welcome counterpoint to the rising wind outside. Warmth radiated, dissolving the week's accumulated tensions. I found a forgotten novel, sank into a chair, and let the fire's rhythmic breathing lull me towards tranquility. Beyond the walls, the wind sawed through the denuded branches, punctuated by the occasional groan of the cabin settling into its foundations. It was precisely the quietude I'd craved. Then, long after the fire had subsided to a pulsing bed of embers, it came. A knock. Not the random percussion of wind-flung debris, nor the tentative tap of a branch. This was distinct. 3 solid raps, evenly spaced, resonating with deliberate weight against the doorframe. I stilled, breath catching, listening intently over the wind's mournful cry. Silence returned. A strained moment passed. Then, shaking my head with a self-deprecating chuckle, I dismissed it. Wind shear, the old timbers complaining. Nothing more. An unsettling prickle remained, however. I rose, heading towards the compact kitchen for water, needing to dispel the disquiet gathering in my chest. The kitchen was rudimentary, its single window a black mirror reflecting the room against the impenetrable darkness outside. Pouring a glass, my gaze drifted to that window, scanning the indistinct tree line. And that's when I saw it. A presence, tall and gaunt, standing motionless at the forest's edge. A silhouette, devoid of detail but undeniably there, oriented towards the cabin. I blinked hard, my pulse accelerating. When my eyes refocused, the space was empty. Only the tangled blackness and the restless sway of branches remained. A trick of the light, I insisted inwardly. A shadow play conjured by fatigue. Yet the knot of apprehension tightened in my gut. Returning to the living room, I fought the pervasive sensation of being observed. The fire was a dying ember heart, its faint glow doing little to push back the encroaching chill that seeped from the very bones of the cabin. I pulled a thick blanket around my shoulders, reclaiming my chair. Just as a semblance of ease began to return, it sounded again. The knock. 3 slow, resonant impacts on the door. My throat constricted. This was no atmospheric quirk. It was too clear, too purposeful. Someone or something waited outside. Slowly, deliberately, I stood, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Every nerve screamed caution, urged me to ignore it, to stay barricaded within the fragile light. But curiosity, that insidious human compulsion, won out. I moved towards the door, paused with my hand hovering over the cold metal knob, then turned it and pulled. Nothing. The narrow porch lay vacant, bathed in the weak moonlight filtering through the clouds. Only the wind's ceaseless lament filled the air. Stepping out, my breath pluming white in the frigid air, I scanned the surroundings. Empty. No footprints disturbed the thin layer of frost on the ground. No sign anyone had stood there moments before. Just the tenebrous woods encircling me. The groaning cabin at my back. About to retreat inside, a flicker of movement at the periphery snagged my attention. Beyond the tree line, the figure had returned. still as stone, a vertical slash of deeper darkness against the gloom, barely discernible. Features remained elusive, yet the focus's ring was palpable, an intense, unseen gaze pinning me in place. Raw instinct surged, a cold wave of dread. I backed towards the threshold, the hairs on my neck prickling, refusing to break eye contact with the shape. Then, as swiftly as it had materialized, it retracted, melting back into the impenetrable shadows of the forest. I slammed the door, the bolt shooting home with a sharp metallic crack, my hands trembling violently. Rationalizations warred within me, hallucinations, stress, the power of suggestion. But a deeper, colder certainty had taken root. I was not alone here. The remainder of the night became a waking vigil. I fed the fire obsessively, desperate for light and warmth. Yet the profound chill persisted, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the ancient wood, every gust rattling the window panes, sent jolts of adrenaline through me. My eyes darted constantly towards the windows, half expecting, half dreading the reappearance of that silent watcher. It never came. When the first tentative rays of dawn finally pierced the oppressive gray, my bags were already packed. Another minute within those walls was unthinkable. I threw my duffel into the car, the engine roaring to life in the pre-dawn stillness, and fled down the narrow track, the cabin shrinking in my rearview mirror, my heart still a frantic drum against my ribs. I never recounted the events to Bernard. The words felt inadequate, prone to disbelief. But the cabin remains unoccupied in my mind, a place I will not revisit. Because whatever presence lingered in those woods, watching from the threshold of darkness, it was no mere shadow, no trick of the light. And the unsettling conviction remains, it hadn't finished observing. The hour was obscene, perhaps 2 in the morning, maybe bleeding closer to 3. And Elias sat hunched within the cramped confines of his study. He bathed the room in stark, shadowless light, a personal bulwark against the gloom he detested while working. Open laptop, a chaotic constellation of documents, the usual nocturnal tableau. His back remained turned to the window, its blinds habitually neglected. Why bother? The view offered only indistinct shrubs, a line of fencing, and the vast, swallowing darkness, where streetlights dared not tread. But tonight, stretching back, a weary arch in his spine, his gaze drifted to the window pane. His own reflection surfaced, familiar. Behind it, another. Something vaguely human-shaped, superimposed on the night. Elias went utterly still, a sudden, cold rigidity seizing him. His heart kicked against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat. He spun around, chair scraping harshly on the floor. Nothing. The room stood vacant, saturated in light. His eyes darted to the empty chair opposite his desk, and swept the corners cluttered with stacked boxes. No intruder lurked there. A nonsensical peek under the desk, a glance behind the solid wood door. Fruitless. Absurd. He turned back to the window. It remained. Lodged in the glass, just behind his reflected self, stood the silhouette. A shadow sculpted into human form, motionless, taller than him by a head perhaps. No face registered, just a stark, dark contour. Shoulders, head, the posture of standing. It possessed a solidity, a deliberate shape unlike some random trick of light. His own image stared back, crisp and clear, amidst the reflected clutter of his desk and chair. And behind him, the presence. Yet the physical space behind him held only air. A tremor ran through him as he rose, his mouth suddenly arid. He approached the window, confronting it directly, trying to align his body with the reflected image. The silhouette in the glass held its ground, occupying the space just behind where he'd been seated. His fingers touched the pane. It felt unnaturally cold. He scanned the exterior darkness through the glass, searching for some object clinging to the outside, some explanation. Nothing but the familiar void. He looked again at the reflection. It persisted. A tightness constricted his chest. Breathe, he told himself, forcing air into his lungs. Calm. There must be logic here. Slowly, deliberately, he pivoted once more, scrutinizing every inch of the small room. Silence, profound save for the low thrum of the laptop fan and the faint electrical buzz from a desk lamp. The rest of the house slept, nowhere to hide. The door, closed and solid. No closets, just the desk, the chairs, the impassive boxes. He touched them, confirming their mundane reality, their stillness. He ran a hand along the bare walls, feeling foolish. Of course, no one was there. Stepping back, his eyes found the window again. The reflection presented the same impossible scene. Elias, his desk, the sentinel shape behind him. He waved a hand. His mirrored self obeyed perfectly. The figure did not stir, not a twitch. He sidestepped left, then right. The silhouette shifted its position relative to his reflection, always maintaining its station directly behind him, slightly offset, as if observing, yet possessing no discernible eyes or face. An idea sparked. Kill the lights. He located the wall switch, flicked it. Darkness flooded the room, punctuated only by the weak glow of the laptop screen. As his eyes adjusted, a faint ghost of his reflection remained visible, and behind it, impossibly, the figure lingered, a deeper void within the dimness. He flipped the switch back on, a wave of nausea rising in his gut. He stood rooted for a long minute, adrift. His phone. Take a picture. Proof. Or perhaps a clue. Some unnoticed object outside catching the light strangely. He unlocked the device, aimed the camera at the window, focusing on the glass. Snap. Snap. He examined the screen. His own reflection stared back, framed by the window sash. No figure. It hadn't registered. More pictures, different angles, frantic adjustments. The entity refused to be captured electronically. Yet, with his own eyes, every glance at the window confirmed its unwavering presence in the reflection. His heart hammered, a frantic pulse in his ears. Sweat slicked his palms. He wiped them uselessly on his trousers. His breathing grew shallow, catching in his throat. Stay calm. Maybe leave the room. Change the perspective entirely. He pulled the office door open, stepping into the dim hallway, leaving the lights blazing within the study. Peering back, he saw only the familiar setup. Desk, chair, boxes, the window at the far end, and faintly, visible even from this distance, the reflection. The figure still stood sentinel behind his vacant place. He retreated down the hall to the living room, flicking on every light as he went, pacing the floor, thoughts racing, grappling with the sheer impossibility. Calling the authorities felt ridiculous, reporting a stubborn reflection. They'd assume intoxication, delusion. But he was so poured a glass of water in the kitchen, gulping it down, then splashing cool water on his face. The shock helped anchor him momentarily. Back in the hallway, he peered into the office. Still there. He needed another angle. He went outside, unlocking the front door and circling around the house through the chill night air. The ground near the study window was dry, undisturbed. He pressed close, peering in from the darkness. Just his brightly lit office. Chair, desk, boxes. No figure inside. Nothing to miss. He tapped the glass lightly. Silence. The yard was empty, the fence line unbroken. A distant car hummed on the main road, the only sound. He retreated indoors, locking the door firmly behind him. The unease intensified, gnawing at his composure. No explanation surfaced. Back in the study, the window offered the same chilling view. He experimented, moving around the room. Near the desk, the figure loomed behind his reflection. Closer to the window, it remained. It seemed fixed to a point in the room. Yet paradoxically, it stayed perpetually behind him in the glass, adjusting its relative position as he moved left or right. It never initiated movement. No raised hand, no tilted head. A static, watching shape. The fine hairs on his arms prickled. His stomach clenched. A dull ache began behind his eyes. What was this? He mentally scanned for possibilities. An external object casting an odd shadow. A complex interplay of light sources. But the yard was empty. Dark. No lights positioned to create such a specific, anthropomorphic form. He reached out again, pressing his fingertips flat against the cold glass, tracing its smooth surface, seeking flaws. He breathed deliberately, slowly, fighting panic. He studied his own reflected face, eyes, nose, mouth, the texture of his shirt. All accurate, mundane. A perfect mirror image, but for the impossible addition. That presence corresponded to nothing tangible in the room, visible only within the pain. Enough. He yanked the cord, letting the blinds clatter down, obscuring the glass completely behind a sterile white curtain. The reflection vanished. Relief washed over him, thin and fleeting. If he raised them again, would it still be there? He waited, breathing in the sudden privacy, the silence broken only by his own pulse. Go to bed. Leave it. But the not knowing was its own torment. He had to look. Slowly, tentatively, he raised the blinds just enough. His reflection reappeared, and behind it, undeterred, unmoved, the figure remained, as if waiting. His hands trembled. He sank back into his chair, this time facing the window directly, watching the silent drama unfold in the glass. A foolish impulse made him whisper, "Hello?" The word hung dead in the air. No response. No change. He listened intently. Laptop fan. Light bulb hum. Nothing else. He switched off the laptop screen, minimizing glare. The reflection dimmed, but the silhouette persisted. He turned off the desk lamp. Lit now only by the overhead fixture, the room felt starker, the figure in the glass no less present. He extinguished the ceiling light too, relying on the spill from the hallway. Darker now, yet still there. A strange tension coiled within him, the urge to flee the house warring with a morbid fascination. He couldn't grasp it. He snatched a sheet of paper from the desk, holding it up behind his back while watching the reflection. Would it block the view? His mirrored self held the paper. The figure appeared unchanged, seemingly positioned behind. The within the reflected space. It defied physical interaction. He stepped closer, crowding the glass until his reflection nearly filled it. Impossibly, the figure seemed to compress or shift slightly, ensuring it remained visible just behind his shoulder. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He swiped at it with his sleeve. His breathing hitched again. Slow down. Slow down. He dropped the blinds once more, decisively, left them down. He wouldn't look again tonight. Backing away, he switched off the light and exited the study, pulling the door shut. Standing in the hallway, a ridiculous urge prompted him to check again. He cracked the door, lifted a slat of the blind just a fraction. Still there. He let it fall, a knot tightening in his throat. His phone felt heavy in his hand. He dialed a friend. It rang, unanswered in the dead of night. He hung up without leaving a message. What could he possibly articulate? There's a ghost in my window, but only in the reflection, and it won't show up on camera. Insanity. He wasn't hallucinating. His senses felt sharp, grounded. Everything else was normal. Only the window held this aberration. Fetching a small flashlight from the kitchen, he returned to the office door. He shone the beam onto the blinds, then, steeling himself, raised them again and played the light across the glass. Dust motes danced, smudges became apparent, but the figure remained steadfast, unaffected by the directed beam. Drastic measures. He retrieved a large sheet of cardboard from a packing box and, using tape, secured it firmly over the inside of the window, completely blocking the glass. He stood staring at the blank brown surface, half expecting its shape to bleed through. Just cardboard. He tapped it, knocked lightly. Silence. He waited, listening to the thrum of his own blood, a faint ringing in his ears. Minutes passed. A measure of calm returned. Out of sight. Out of mind. If he couldn't see it. He killed the light, left the office, and this time, locked the door. A pointless gesture of finality. He retreated to the living room couch, the silence of the house pressing in. Every time he closed his eyes, the dark shape materialized behind his eyelids. Doing nothing. Just standing there in the glass. Why? Had anything seemed strange before tonight? No. Utterly normal until that casual glance. Sleep felt distant, impossible. He considered staying on the couch. His mind circled back endlessly to the figure. No sound, no touch, just presence. Would daylight banish it? Or would it still be there, waiting behind the cardboard? He found himself back at the office door, listening. Silence. He unlocked it, turned on the light. The cardboard shield remained taped to the window. He hesitated, hand hovering near the tape. Then slowly, deliberately, he peeled it away, lowering the cardboard. He looked into the glass. His reflection snapped into focus, and behind him, unchanged, unmoving, the figure stood. A shaky sigh escaped him. It hadn't left. It did nothing. It simply waited. A fresh wave of cold sweat prickled his back. His eyes felt raw. He recovered the window with the cardboard, securing it firmly, then lowered the blinds over it for good measure. He left the room, shut the door, locked it. No more looking tonight. He would wait for morning. He needed noise, distraction. In the living room, he switched on the television, keeping the volume low, a murmur against the silence. He sat on the couch, trying to focus on the flickering screen, trying not to think. The tightness in his chest remained. He tapped his foot rhythmically. Eventually, thirst drove him back to the kitchen for more water. The familiar space felt safer. No windows faced that side of the yard. Leaning against the counter, sipping slowly, he felt his heart rate subside slightly, though his thoughts continued their frantic race. The clock showed nearly 3 a.m. The office would remain locked until sunrise. He switched off most lights, leaving just a single lamp burning in the living room, a small pool of warmth in the encroaching dark. Lying down on the couch, phone clutched in his hand, he listened to the house settle around him, waiting, knowing that behind a locked door, hidden by blinds and cardboard, a window reflection held an impossible observer. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't dispel it. He could only wait for whatever came next. That antiquated rotary phone, a curio scavenged from some forgotten flea market stall years past, was pure ornament. Its bone-colored casing bore a fine fracture near the coiled wire. The dial itself, a stubborn circle, protested against hurried fingers. Yet perched on a spindle-legged table in my front room, it possessed a certain nostalgic gravity. Utterly disconnected, devoid of life or line, it served merely as a silent testament to bygone eras. Then, perhaps a month ago, the inexplicable began. Deep in the nocturnal void, the phone shrilled. A muted, gut-twisting peal that dragged me from the depths of sleep. My digital clock bled red numerals, just past 2. Bolt upright, I strained my ears against the silence that followed, eventually dismissing the phantom sound as frayed dream stuff. But the following night, closer now to 3, it returned. A ring less sharp than submerged, as if filtered through leagues of water or dense stone. A glacial wave of gooseflesh prickled my skin. Heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I crept into the living room. There it sat, immutable on its stand, the handset nestled snugly in its cradle, its plastic shell absorbing the thin, sodium-orange wash of light from the street lamp outside. Lifting the receiver felt momentous. Silence greeted me initially, then a barely perceptible crackle surfaced. Less static, more a low vibrational hum. My grip tightened on the cool plastic curve. I waited, breath held captive at my chest. Nothing. No voice, no signal. Only that persistent, low thrum. A parched, cottony feeling filled my mouth. Replacing the handset, I flooded the apartment with harsh electric light, chasing away shadows, desperately concocting rationalizations. Vestigial wiring, perhaps. Some stray atmospheric disturbance. Within days, the anomaly solidified into ritual. Precisely at 2:47 each morning, the submerged ringing commenced. Attempts to ignore it proved futile. Its insistence, 4 or 5 tolls before lapsing into silence, frayed my nerves to brittle threads. Soon, anticipation became its own alarm. I found myself rising minutes before the appointed time, drawn unwillingly to the living room. There I'd stand, a sentinel in the gloom, fixated on that inert object, the frantic pulse in my ears drowning thought. And then, the ring. A jolt every single time. A tremor would seize my hand as I reached for the receiver. The yield was always the same, a wash of static, punctuated occasionally by faint, dry clicks, or a sibilant rasp that scraped tantalizingly close to the sound of breath. A week into this unnerving cadence, I resolved to banish the object. Down into the building's dusty subterranean storage I carried it, secreting it behind a barricade of forgotten boxes in a lightless corner. An immense weight seemed to lift as I ascended the stairs. That night offered blessed, uninterrupted sleep, but the reprieve was fleeting. 2 nights hence, the familiar summons echoed. Heart seizing, I stumbled into the living room and stopped dead. It rested on its familiar perch. Worse, the thin black cord snaked from its base into a wall socket I swore hadn't existed moments before, the wire disappearing unnaturally beneath the skirting board. Disbelief warred with mounting terror. I knew I had taken it downstairs. My hands trembled violently as I wrenched the plug from the wall. Lifting the phone, its plastic felt unnaturally frigid. This time, I entombed it deep within my bedroom closet, behind a bulwark of old coats, turning the key firmly in the lock. At the ordained hour, 2:47 a.m., the ringing pierced the night once more. Emerging into the living room felt like stepping onto alien soil. There it sat, impossibly returned to its table. The closet door remained steadfastly locked, yet the phone presided. I snatched the receiver from its cradle with a choked gasp. A roar of static assaulted my ear, then subsided into a field of delicate pops and hisses. Through this electronic veil, a voice materialized. Low, desiccated, impossibly familiar. It spoke my name. Alara. Again and again. A mantra of dread. The receiver slipped from my grasp, clattering against the floor. My legs turned to water. Scrabbling back to my bedroom, I slammed and bolted the door. Pressing myself against the wood, listening to the frantic pounding of my own blood. Sleep was an exiled country. When dawn eventually grayed the windows, sheer willpower propelled me back to the living room. The phone sat placidly on its table, the cord again disconnected, radiating an unnerving silence. A fierce desire to hurl the thing into oblivion warred with an equally potent, inexplicable tether. Fear coiled in my gut, yet I felt magnetically drawn, compelled not by possession, but by a gnawing need for something. An answer. Understanding. Perhaps just a confrontation with the absurd. Resigned, I began setting my alarm for 2:45 a.m., surrendering to the grim rhythm. Wake by the phone. Answer on the first ring. The nightly harvest remained meager, static like distant surf. Susurrations too faint to decipher. Arid clicks. Sometimes I'd wait, poised for a coherent word, a phrase. Sometimes I'd venture questions into the void. Who's there? What is it you want? Receiving only the indifferent crackle in return. One night transcended the usual ambiguity. Amidst the static, a distinct sound emerged. Breathing. Slow, heavy, agonizingly labored. It seemed to syncopate with my own ragged, fearful gasps. My pulse hammered a painful tattoo against my temples. Hello, I managed, my voice thin. Can you hear me? The response was a murmur soft as moth wings against the ear, utterly unintelligible. Straining to grasp its meaning was like trying to hold smoke. I finally broke the connection, staring at the inert receiver, palms slick with sweat, thoughts tumbling in frantic disarray. Sleep became a scarce commodity. Daylight hours blurred into a drowsy fugue. I caught myself drifting off at my desk, earning concerned inquiries from my supervisor, Silas, which I deflected with vague mentions of insomnia. Sharing this nightly ordeal felt impossible. The sheer absurdity would invite ridicule, disbelief, perhaps facile jokes about ghosts or crossed wires. Laughter felt leagues away. A perpetual unease settled over me, casting long shadows even in the daytime. My own apartment felt subtly altered, the corners darker, the silence heavier. Every glance towards the phone sparked anticipatory dread. My temper frayed. Restlessness became my default state. Colleagues observed the change. Their sympathetic glances met with curt dismissals. Another week bled away in this pattern. Desperate for a foothold in reason, I contacted the phone company. Could a disconnected instrument, I inquired, somehow channel stray signals, manifest a phantom ring? The technician on the line sounded baffled, then skeptical. He'd never encountered such a thing. Radio frequency interference was his best guess, though he conceded it hardly accounted for patterned static or whispered fragments. His ultimate advice was blunt: discard the antique. Frustration simmered as I ended the call. I nearly obeyed. Phone in hand, I reached the apartment door, poised to finally exorcise this presence. But a peculiar constriction seized my chest, an invisible hand halted my progress. I retreated, placing the phone back on its table, confounded by my own reluctance. A quiet insistence resonated within. Tonight's call must be answered. That evening, I attempted a facade of normalcy. A meager dinner, the television flickering ignored images, a conscious effort to disregard the clock's relentless march. I paced, performed push-ups, anything to dissipate the coiled energy tightening my muscles. Yet my gaze kept snagging on the phone, a silent black hole drawing all attention. Sleep, when I finally sought my bed near midnight, remained elusive. I lay staring into the darkness, a prisoner awaiting execution. At 2:46 I rose, the familiar acceleration of my pulse drumming in my ears. I took my station beside the table. Punctually, the muffled summons came. First ring, receiver lifted. Hissing static yielded to near silence. "I'm here," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I can hear you." A faint susurration answered, coalescing briefly into the chilling echo of my name. Alara. Sweat beaded on my brow. "I'm listening," I forced out louder this time. "What is it you need?" The static surged, swelling and receding rhythmically, as if striving for articulation. For a long minute I stood frozen, handset clamped in a death grip, every nerve stretched taut. Then, a single syllable tore through the noise. Thick, distorted, utterly indecipherable. And the line clicked dead. The rest of that night passed sleeplessly, my gaze fixed on the silent phone. Dawn brought a new, frantic strategy. I purged the apartment of all potential electronic interference. Television, stereo, lamps, everything unplugged, silenced. The phone itself remained inert throughout the day, offering no clue. I scoured the walls, probing for hidden jacks or clandestine wires, finding only plaster and paint. Yet, as darkness reclaimed the city, the familiar dread returned. The ritual unfolded as before. 2:47 a.m. The ring. I seized the receiver, holding my breath. The static attacked with renewed ferocity, a physical sting against my ear. Behind it, a low, indistinct mumbling persisted. "I can't understand," pleaded my voice trembling. "Speak clearly." For one crystalline second, the interference vanished. my name emerged, not whispered now, but chanted. Slow, deliberate, iterative. Laura. 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 Crushing weight pressed on my chest. My hands shook uncontrollably. The urge to hurl the receiver across the room was nearly overwhelming. Instead, I slammed it down, panting, mind reeling. Terror warred with a morbid fascination. What did it signify? My bedroom became untenable. I relocated my sleep, or attempts at it, to the living room couch, ensuring I wouldn't miss the nightly summons. A small notebook lay perpetually open on the coffee table, a hopeful, futile gesture towards documentation. But the harvest remained cryptic, predominantly static, elusive whispers. Occasionally, a dry, rasping laugh echoed through the line, or a sound like a stifled cough. Sometimes syllables surfaced, R, N, S, tantalizing fragments that might have belonged to my name before dissolving back into noise. Nothing coalesced. My living space mirrored my internal state, chaotic. Empty coffee cups colonized surfaces. Remnants of hastily consumed snacks lay scattered. Existence narrowed, orbiting solely around the impending 2:47 a.m. call. Friends like Maya went unanswered, invitations declined, messages ignored. I was consumed by the pursuit of an answer, chasing an elusive revelation perpetually just beyond grasp. My reflection offered a haunting portrait. Pallid skin stretched taut over bone, shadowed hollows beneath eyes that seemed too large, clothes perpetually rumpled. Every mundane sound, the refrigerator's drone, a floorboard's groan, became a potential trigger, jolting my already frayed system. One night, desperation fueled a surge of defiance. Upon answering, I commanded, my voice cracking despite the intended force. "Stop this! Leave me alone!" The static responded not with silence, but with escalating intensity. A low, electronic growl that swelled, then abruptly ceased. Dead air. A fleeting, fragile sense of triumph surged as I hung up. Had I finally broken the pattern? Seconds later, the phone erupted again, its ring sharper, louder than ever before. Snatching the receiver, I hissed, "What do you want from me?" A blast of static, painful in its volume, made me recoil. And then, the name. My name. Repeated in that slow, deliberate cadence, but this time, closer. Intimately close, as if whispered directly against my ear canal. Alara. I slammed the handset down, trembling, a feverish heat suffusing my entire body. The paradox held me fast, unbearable, yet utterly inescapable. The ensuing week dissolved into a monotonous cycle of dread and anticipation. Time itself seemed to warp around the nightly event. I loathed the approaching darkness, yet simultaneously craved the 2:47 appointment, counting down the hours with obsessive precision. I'd find myself pacing, sometimes lifting the receiver prematurely, seeking connection before the ordained moment. Always met with silence. Only at 2:47 did the circuit open. My responses varied. Calm inquiries, frustrated shouts, desperate pleas. But the input remained constant, static, digital detritus, the occasional chilling iteration of my name. Each call left me drained, terrified, yet paradoxically hungry for the next, yearning for clarity, for coherent speech, for meaning. In a flash of desperate ingenuity, I tried capturing proof, placing my smartphone beside the old phone, its voice recorder active during the call. Listening back the next day yielded nothing but the faintest whisper of ambient static. No voice, no name. Even the distinctive ring itself was absent from the recording. erased, as if the event existed only within the confines of my perception. The isolation deepened. No evidence, no witness. Just me and the nightly phantasmagoria. Then, mere nights ago, a palpable shift occurred. The ring came. I answered. Instead of the usual abrasive static, a low, resonant hum filled the line, pulsing rhythmically in my ear. Through it, distinctly, I heard a long, slow exhale. "I'm here," I managed, voice unsteady. "Listening." The hum intensified, accompanied by a soft, furtive shuffling, like fabric brushing against upholstery, someone adjusting their position. A prickling sensation crawled across my scalp. I waited, poised for a voice, but none came. Instead, the air in the room plunged, becoming instantly, unnaturally frigid. My breath hitched. The living room felt like a tomb. Clutching the receiver, I heard it. A faint, abrasive scraping noise transmitted through the line, thin and sharp like fingernails dragged across metal. My heart threatened to batter its way out of my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream, but no sound emerged. The line clicked dead. I remained frozen, panting into the sudden silence, the receiver still glued to my ear. That chilling incident galvanized me into one final, desperate act of expulsion. I swaddled the phone in layers of thick plastic sheeting, binding it tightly with round after round of duct tape until it resembled a grotesque mummy. Driving far beyond the city limits, navigating desolate industrial tracks, I located a cavernous dumpster behind a derelict warehouse. With a grunt of effort and a surge of frantic hope, I heaved a sealed bundle into the rusting metal maw. The drive home was fraught, my hands slick and trembling on the wheel. Exhaustion claimed me early that night, promising oblivion. But at 2:47 a.m., the muffled ring tore through the fragile peace. I shot upright in bed, a vice closing around my chest. Stumbling blindly towards the living room, I beheld the impossible. The phone sat on its table, utterly bare, stripped of all plastic and tape. The handset lay beside the cradle, as if recently used. The cord plunged accusingly into the wall socket. A wave of nauseating dread washed over me. My skull throbbed. Lifting the receiver, I was met with rattling static. I can't take this anymore. The words tore from my dry throat, ragged and shaking. The static resolved into a sharp hiss. Then, inevitably, my name, repeated like a litany. Lara. Lara. I slammed the handset down, reaching for my mobile, a frantic impulse to call. Whom? The police? A friend? The futility crashed down. How could I articulate this madness? Defeated, I lowered my hand, my gaze locking onto that malevolent, archaic object. So now, I exist in the interstice, perpetually awaiting 2:47 a.m. Its arrival is a certainty, immutable as planetary motion. There's a terrifying paradox within me, a sense of hovering on the precipice of some profound, unsettling revelation, juxtaposed with the chilling awareness of my own unraveling control. My heart kicks into a frantic rhythm merely thinking of the next call. The dimensions of my apartment seem to shrink daily, the walls pressing closer. I try to avoid the living room after sundown, yet as the hour approaches, an irresistible magnetism draws me. I creep towards the table, pulse hammering a deafening beat in the hollow of my ears, and I wait. The ring always sounds. I always answer. Escape feels illusory, explanation impossible. With each passing night, the transmission sharpens. The static recedes, the whispers gain substance, grow bolder. Sometimes, long after the line falls silent, I fancy I hear my name still echoing. Ilara, a phantom resonance within my own skull. Ignoring the call feels unthinkable, fraught with unknown consequences. Continuing this dialogue feels equally perilous. Yet, the choice is not mine. Every single time, compelled by a force I cannot name, I lift the receiver. The tension coils ever tighter in my chest. Something demands an audience, and a terrified, exhausted fragment of my soul desperately needs to understand why.